Black Mafia Family's junior boss, convicted twice, reportedly caught again. Podcasts and social media accounts reported this week that a man calling himself the junior boss of the Black Mafia family was caught again in St. Louis, reportedly with 53 kilos of cocaine, 3 handguns, and tens of thousands of dollars in cash. As of this recording, federal authorities have not confirmed those numbers, but the name attached to the report is not new to federal investigators. What follows draws on federal court records, Department of Justice press releases, and contemporary news reporting. Where a court reached a final outcome, we state it as such. Where a report has not been confirmed by an official source, including the arrest reported this week, we say so clearly and will update this record as the facts come in. The Black Mafia family was founded in 1985 in southwest Detroit, at the height of the crack cocaine era, by two brothers, Demetrius Flannery, known as Big Meech, and Terry Flannery, known as Southwest T. What began as a local operation would grow, over the next 2 decades, into one of the largest cocaine trafficking networks federal investigators had ever dismantled. What started as street-level distribution grew into a multi-state cocaine trafficking and money laundering operation. Federal investigators would later describe BMF as one of the largest cocaine distribution networks in the country, moving product from Detroit to cities across the South and the Midwest. Chad Brown grew up in St. Louis. Court records describe him as a member of the Black Mafia family's cocaine distribution conspiracy, and reporting based on the federal case file describes him as one of BMF's top lieutenants, Big Meech's second-in-command. Brown gave himself the nickname J-Bo for Junior Boss. As Junior Boss, Brown's reported role was to carry Big Meech's orders down to the organization's rank and file, a position of trust inside a network that, by the federal government's account, moved large quantities of cocaine through Detroit, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Miami, and St. Louis. BMF did not stay underground. The organization's leaders spent heavily on luxury cars, jewelry, and nightclub tabs, and built a parallel identity through BMF Entertainment, a record label and mixtape imprint that put the organization's name and slogans directly into Atlanta's hip-hop scene. For a stretch of the 2000s, BMF operated as both a drug network and a street-level entertainment brand, blurring the line between the two on purpose. That visibility cut both ways. The Drug Enforcement Administration and federal prosecutors spent years building a case against BMF's leadership and lieutenants, tracking the flow of cocaine and cash across state lines. Starting in 2005, federal prosecutors indicted BMF members and associates across multiple districts: Michigan, Georgia, California, Florida, Missouri, and Tennessee. Chad Brown was charged in the Eastern District of Michigan, in Detroit, on a superseding indictment, conspiracy to distribute 5 kilograms or more of cocaine, and conspiracy to launder monetary instruments. Building the case took years of coordinated work across the Drug Enforcement Administration, the FBI, and federal prosecutors in multiple states, tracking cocaine shipments and the cash and property used to launder the proceeds. By the time indictments came down, prosecutors described BMF not as a loose street crew, but as a structured criminal enterprise with defined roles, leadership, lieutenants, and distributors, which is the position Chad Brown occupied. On April 2, 2007, Brown pleaded guilty to both counts in federal court in Detroit. On November 15, 2007, Brown was sentenced to 188 months in federal prison, 15 years and 8 months, after pleading guilty to cocaine conspiracy and money laundering conspiracy. Reporting at the time, based on the case file, described him as one of the organization's top lieutenants who refused to cooperate with prosecutors, a decision that likely closed off any chance at a reduced sentence. Brown's sentence was part of a wider collapse. Big Meech and Southwest T were later convicted under federal continuing criminal enterprise statutes, and each sentenced to 30 years. The organization the Flannery brothers built from Detroit outward was, on paper, finished. Years later, the Flannery brothers' story was turned into a scripted television series for the Starz network, produced with input from music executive 50 Cent. The show dramatized BMF's rise for a mass audience. But a dramatization is not a transcript, and several details in this video come from the underlying court record specifically, because the television version and the legal record don't always agree. The BMF name did not disappear. It kept circulating through hip-hop lyrics, documentaries, and eventually a scripted television series loosely based on the Flannery brothers' story. The gap between the dramatized legend and the court record is part of why we're leaning on primary documents here, not street legend. Federal records place Brown's sentencing in late 2007. A sentence of that length points to a release sometime in the 2010s. Court filings don't give us his exact release date, but by the early 2020s, Brown was back in the St. Louis area and back in front of federal investigators, this time for something other than drugs. In May of 2021, Brown applied for a Paycheck Protection Program loan for a company called Popular Music Group, LLC, claiming gross income for the prior year of $178,653. The government says that claim was false. According to the Justice Department, Brown's actual tax filings for that year reported adjusted gross income of just $7,249, with a Schedule C only for towing services showing $8,250, no Schedule C for Popular Music Group at all. Prosecutors say Brown received $20,833 in loan funds based on the false filing. In October of 2023, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Missouri announced charges against 34 people described as members and associates of the Black Mafia Family, operating a drug trafficking and money laundering network in the St. Louis area. Chad Brown was one of them, indicted on bank fraud and false document charges tied to the pandemic loan. That 2023 case was built by the St. Louis Gateway Strike Force, a joint task force pairing the DEA, the FBI, the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, the U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and St. Louis County Police. Prosecutors said the broader network was moving methamphetamine, fentanyl, and cocaine into the St. Louis area, the same underlying business, run under the same BMF name, nearly 2 decades after the Detroit case. According to the government's detention motion in that case, Brown again referred to himself as the junior boss of BMF, and prosecutors pointed to social media videos in which he discussed the organization's history in the drug trade. That same period, federal prosecutors in Missouri also charged Brown with being a felon in possession of a firearm. A later superseding indictment, filed in June of 2023, added a second firearms count and a charge of possessing a machine gun. Court filings show Brown representing himself at points and filing motions challenging the court's jurisdiction. Our sources do not show a final verdict on those specific firearms charges. As far as the public record we reviewed shows, that piece remains unresolved and should be treated as alleged, not proven. The pandemic loan case did resolve. On January 29, 2024, the Justice Department announced that Chad Brown pleaded guilty in federal court in St. Louis to bank fraud and to using a false writing or document. Prosecutors noted he was being held in jail in part as a self-reported member of the Black Mafia Family. The federal record for Chad Brown is built almost entirely around drugs, money laundering, fraud, and firearms statutes, not assault or violence charges filed against him personally. Some reporting has called him an enforcer. That word does not appear in the primary court documents we reviewed. It's a fair narrative shorthand for his rank inside the organization, not a court of record fact, and we want to be upfront about that distinction. Which brings us back to this week. Podcast and social media accounts, not yet an official Justice Department release, not yet confirmed by local St. Louis news, reported that Chad Brown was arrested again, allegedly found with 53 kilos of cocaine, 3 firearms, and roughly $40,000 to $50,000 in cash. If accurate, it would be Brown's third serious federal exposure in under 20 years. The original BMF case, the pandemic loan fraud, and now this. We're naming that gap on purpose. Kilo counts and cash totals move fast and get exaggerated on social media before an official charging document ever exists. Until the Eastern District of Missouri or another agency confirms this arrest on the record, we're presenting it as reported, not proven. The same standard we've tried to hold for every claim in this video. Laid end to end, the confirmed federal record on Chad Brown reads like this. 2005, indicted in Detroit as part of the Black Mafia Family case. 2007, guilty plea and a 15-year, 8-month sentence. 2021, a fraudulent pandemic loan application. 2023, named again in a St. Louis federal roundup on bank fraud and firearms charges. 2024, a guilty plea on the fraud counts. Everything after that, including this week's report, is still being written. Strip away the nickname and the myth, and the paper trail on Chad Brown is still remarkable. A founding-era lieutenant in one of the largest cocaine networks in American history, convicted, sentenced, released, and back in federal crosshairs twice more since. Whatever happens with this week's report, the junior boss has already written most of his own. Chad Brown's story has already gone from federal prison to federal fraud charges to, reportedly, federal prison again. We'll keep following it as the record gets confirmed. Subscribe for more cases from the street files and the court files. This has been Crimetown TV.